it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I'm an urban explorer who visited a remote Alaskan island in the Bering Sea. By Darius McCorkindale. King Island loomed out of the mist like a ghostly lookout in the middle of the Bering Sea. The island, barely a mile wide and a mile long, was a rugged outcrop of steep slopes and jagged cliffs. Perched precariously on these cliffs was a village of stilted huts, abandoned for over 50 years. The village, once home to the Asuluk, people of the sea, now stood as a skeletal remnant of a long-gone era, its structures creaking in the wind, and its pathways overgrown with a tangle of hardy vegetation. The absolute isolation of King Island was precisely what had drawn Michael Pay, a seasoned urban explorer and popular YouTuber, to its shores. Michael had built a substantial following by documenting the forgotten corners of the world, places where history and decay intertwine to tell silent, haunting stories. King Island, with its unique history and haunting desolation, was a perfect addition to his channel. It was strictly against the rules, but he was determined to stay overnight, capturing footage that would mesmerize his audience and cement his reputation as a fearless explorer. As the daily tourist boat approached the island, Michael stood at the bow, his camera already recording the approach. The tourists around him chattered excitedly, their voices a stark contrast to the overwhelming silence of the island. The guide's voice echoed through a megaphone, recounting the history of the Asuluk and the village's abandonment. But Michael barely listened. He'd done his research into this place, and his mind was already focused on the night ahead. The boat docked at a small, rickety pier, and the tourists disembarked, their cameras clicking as they stood in the haunting scenery. Michael hung back, though, his heart pounding with feelings of excitement and trepidation. He watched as the tourists were shepherded around by the guide, their visit limited to a few relatively safe spots. When the time came for the group to return to the boat, Michael discreetly slipped away, hiding behind one of the stilted huts until the sound of the boat's engine faded into the distance. Now, alone on King Island, Michael felt an uncomfortable chill, one that had nothing to do with the temperature. The island seemed to breathe around him, its silence suddenly profound and yet also suffocating. He glanced at his watch. It was just past noon. He had several hours of daylight left to explore and document the village before nightfall. Slinging his backpack over his shoulder, he set off up the steep slope, his camera capturing every creak of wood and rustle of the wind-blown grass. For Michael, the true adventure had now begun, but he had no idea of the terror that awaited him in the darkness. As dusk settled over King Island, the final rays of sunlight painted the abandoned village in hues of deep orange and shadowy blue. Michael had spent the afternoon methodically exploring and recording the empty huts and narrow pathways. Now, with the boat back to the mainland long departed, he was truly alone. He chose a relatively intact hut, perched on a steep slope for his base camp, its weathered wood and rusted nails offering a semblance of shelter against the encroaching night. He set up his gear meticulously, arranging his camera equipment to capture a 360-degree view of the hut's interior. As the darkness deepened, Michael turned on his flashlight, his beam cutting through the thickening gloom. He spoke into his camera, narrating his thoughts and observations about the ghostly silence and the desolate beauty of the place. His voice sounded unnaturally loud against the backdrop of the island's quiet. With the camera running, Michael ventured outside to continue his exploration under the cover of night. The village felt different in the dark, more sinister, as if the shadows themselves were alive. As he walked, he noticed the wind had picked up, creating an eerie symphony as it whistled through the stilts and cracked wooden beams. And then came the first noise, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like the sound of footsteps on the wooden planks. Michael froze, his flashlight beam darting toward the source of the noise. He saw nothing but the empty village, the windswept paths, and the ghostly silhouettes of the huts. He shook his head, convincing himself it was just the wind playing tricks on his mind. Continuing his exploration, Michael reached a clearing that overlooked the sea. The moon hung low and heavy, casting a silver glow over the water. He paused to capture the scene, marveling at the haunting beauty of the island at night, when he heard it again, this time louder and closer. It was unmistakably the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate. Michael swung around, his flashlight flickering as if the batteries were dying. The beam fell on a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the light. His heart pounded as he squinted, trying to make out the features of the figure. But in the blink of an eye, it was gone, leaving only the swaying grass and the echo of his racing heartbeat. Returning to the hut, Michael felt the first pangs of true fear. He reviewed his footage, hoping to find a rational explanation. But the camera showed only what he had seen: an empty village, a desolate clearing, and a fleeting shadow. The hut's creaking grew louder, more persistent, like the steady drip of water from a faucet, and Michael could no longer ignore the growing sense of dread. As he settled into his sleeping bag, the wind outside seemed to carry whispers, faint and unintelligible. The hut groaned and creaked around him, each noise amplified in the silence. He tried to rationalize it as the natural sounds of an old structure, but deep down he knew something was very wrong. The island was not as abandoned as it seemed, and the spirits of the ancient people, restless and angry, were making their presence known. Sleep was elusive as Michael lay there, eyes wide open, every muscle in his body tense. He realized that he was not alone on King Island, and whatever was out there in the dark was watching, and waiting. The first signs of haunting had made themselves known, and his stay on this desolate island was far from over. Dawn eventually arrived on King Island, but the sunlight did little to dispel the lingering sense of unease. Michael awoke from a restless sleep, his mind still haunted by the inexplicable sounds and shadows of the night before. Determined to uncover the island's secrets, he packed his gear and set out to explore more of the village in the stark light of day. As he navigated the narrow, overgrown paths, Michael stumbled upon an old communal area. The remains of a large fire pit, surrounded by weathered totems and carvings, hinted at the rich cultural civilization that once thrived here. Intricate markings, some almost faded beyond recognition, decorated the totems, telling stories that Michael could only guess at. He documented everything with meticulous care, feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread. In one of the huts, Michael discovered a small, ornately carved box. Inside he found a collection of artifacts, stone tools, bone carvings, and what appeared to be a ceremonial mask. He lifted the mask, and a sudden chill swept through the room, and he felt as though unseen eyes were watching his every move. He quickly replaced the mask and closed the box, but the feeling of being observed lingered. The day passed in a blur of discoveries and mounting tension. The more Michael uncovered, the more the island seemed to respond. Objects began to move on their own, a stone rolling across the floor, a door creaking open without a breeze to move it. Whispers filled the air, barely audible, elusive and just beyond the range of comprehension. At times he swore he caught glimpses of figures out of the corner of his eye, but they vanished the moment he turned to look. As evening approached, Michael retreated to the hut to review his footage and conduct some research on the Asuluk tribe. Using a satellite internet connection, he delved into historical records and anthropological studies. He learned that the Asuluk had lived on King Island for generations, thriving in their unique and challenging environment. However, the records grew vague and unsettling when describing the tribe's sudden departure. According to local folklore and a number of academic sources, the Asuluk had been driven away by the spirits of an even older civilization. These ancient spirits, it was said, were powerful and hostile, angry at the intrusion of the living on their sacred land. The tribe's shaman had reportedly tried to appease the spirits with rituals and offerings, but in the end the Asuluk had no choice but to abandon the island, leaving their homes and possessions behind. This realization hit Michael hard. The spirits he'd sensed were not just figments of his imagination or mere remnants of the past. They were real and dangerously active. As the sun again dipped below the horizon, plunging the island into darkness once more, the paranormal activity escalated to a terrifying level. The whispers grew louder and more coherent, forming disjointed phrases in a language Michael could not understand. Shadows flitted across the walls, sometimes taking on humanoid shapes that seemed to reach out to him. Objects flew across the room with violent force, and the temperature plummeted, making his breath visible in the frigid air. Michael's camera, which he'd left running in the corner of the hut, captured everything. The whispers, the shadows, even the flying objects. He knew he had irrefutable evidence of the haunting, evidence that could propel his YouTube fame to new heights. But the triumph of that realization was overshadowed by sheer terror. He was no longer just an observer. Now he was a target. Frantically, Michael searched through his notes and footage, hoping to find some clue that might help him survive the night. He realized that the spirits were growing increasingly aggressive, perhaps sensing his fear or maybe just angered by his intrusion into their domain. The tales of the Asuluk shaman came back to him, and he wondered if there was any way to replicate their rituals, to somehow appease the spirits long enough for him to escape. Outside, the wind howled, and the hut's aging structure groaned under the pressure of the unseen forces. Michael knew he was running out of time. With trembling hands, he began to set up a makeshift altar using the artifacts he'd found, hoping against hope that he could survive until the boat returned the next day. His second night here was far from over. The spirits of King Island were closing in. The midnight air on King Island was thick with an unnatural chill, as if the island itself had been plunged into an abyss of despair. Michael's makeshift altar stood in the center of the hut, the artifacts arranged with the desperate hope that they might placate the vengeful spirits. But as he knelt before it, clutching the ceremonial mask, the atmosphere inside the hut grew increasingly oppressive. Without warning, a deafening crash reverberated throughout the hut. The walls shuddered as unseen malevolent forces battered them from all sides. Michael scrambled to his feet, heart pounding, as a ghostly figure materialized in front of him. It was a translucent vision of an ancient shaman, eyes burning with an ethereal fire. The spirit's mouth moved, emitting a guttural chant that resonated deep within Michael's bones. Before he could react, the shaman raised a spectral hand. Michael was thrown backward by an invisible force. He crashed into the far wall, pain radiating throughout his body. The mask slipped from his grasp, skidding across the floor. Struggling to breathe, he watched in horror as the room filled with more ghostly apparitions. Men, women, and children of the ancient tribe, their faces contorted with anger and sorrow. Spirits moved with purpose, their collective rage directed at Michael. Objects in the hut levitated and hurtled towards him, barely missing their mark. He ducked and dodged, each near miss intensifying his fear. His initial curiosity about the haunting had morphed into sheer terror. The realization he was no longer an observer but a target had fully sunk in. Desperation clawed at his mind as he tried to formulate an escape plan. He grabbed his flashlight and darted out of the hut, the beams of light flickering erratically. The village outside was a maze of shifting shadows and supernatural glowing figures. Every direction seemed fraught with danger, but he knew he couldn't possibly stay in the hut. His thoughts raced as he considered his options. The boat would return at dawn, but that was hours away. He was trapped on the island with no immediate means of escape. The only chance he had was to survive until daylight. He remembered the old fire pit and the communal area he'd found earlier. Perhaps he could use the open space to his advantage, keeping the spirits at bay long enough to endure the night. As he ran through the village, the spirits pursued him relentlessly. Their whispers grew into a cacophony of wails and chants, their forms flickering in and out of existence. One spirit, more corporeal than the others, reached out and clawed at his arm. Pain shot through him as if he'd been burned. He stumbled but forced himself to keep moving, adrenaline surging through his veins. Finally, he reached the clearing with the fire pit. He dropped to his knees and hastily gathered kindling and wood, praying that a fire might provide some kind of protection. His hands trembled as he struck the match, the tiny flame offering a glimmer of hope. After a short while, he managed to get a small fire going, the flickering flames casting long shadows around the clearing. For a moment, the spirits seemed to hesitate, their forms wavering at the edge of the firelight. Michael took the opportunity to catch his breath, taking stock of the reality of his situation. He was alone, outmatched, and surrounded by hostile forces he barely understood. The curiosity that had driven him to explore King Island now felt like a cruel joke, replaced by a primal fear for his life. The spirits quickly regrouped, their resolve unbroken. They began to circle the fire, their chants growing louder, more insistent. Michael knew the fire wouldn't hold them off forever. As he stared into the flames, he recalled the rituals and offerings mentioned in his research. He needed to perform some form of appeasement, but he had no idea how or if it would even work. With no other options, he grabbed the ceremonial mask from his backpack and placed it on his face, hoping it would grant him some connection to the spirits. He mimicked the shaman's chants he'd heard earlier, his voice trembling. The spirits paused, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. For a brief, hopeful moment, the island seemed to hold its breath. But then the shaman's spirit stepped forward, raising its hand once more. The fire blazed higher, and the ground beneath Michael's feet began to shake. He realized with dawning horror that his attempt at appeasement had only enraged them further. As the spirits closed in, Michael's fear reached its peak. He was out of time and options, facing the full wrath of the island's ancient inhabitants. His only hope now was to somehow endure the night and pray for dawn's arrival, when the boat would return and offer a chance at escape. Part 2. The second night on King Island had turned into an unrelenting nightmare. Michael clung to the hope that he could survive until dawn, but the spirits showed no signs of abating. As he huddled by the fire, the shaman's spirit slowly advanced, his spectral form pulsing with a malevolent energy. The other spirits closed in as well, their chants reaching a fever pitch. Michael's mind raced as he tried to think of a strategy. His urban exploration skills had taught him to navigate any number of dangerous, unstable environments, and he knew he had to use those skills now. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the fight of his life. Grabbing his flashlight and camera, he made a sudden dash away from the fire, heading towards the cliffs on the far side of the village. The spirits followed, their wrath tangible in the air. The ground beneath Michael's feet seemed to tremble with each step, and the whispers and wails of the spirits filled his ears, almost drowning out his own thoughts. He navigated the narrow paths and unstable ground with precision, avoiding pitfalls and crumbling structures. His flashlight beam bounced erratically, casting grotesque shadows that danced and swirled around him. As he climbed higher, the wind picked up, howling through the cliffs and adding to the cacophony of noise. Michael's breath came in ragged gasps, his muscles burning with exertion. He knew he couldn't keep this pace up for long, but stopping was not an option. He glanced at his watch. Dawn was still hours away, and he needed to buy himself more time. Reaching a high vantage point, Michael paused to catch his breath and reassess his situation. Below, the spirits swarmed the village, their glowing forms like a sea of angry fireflies. He could see the faint outline of the shore in the distance, where the boat would arrive with the first light of day. It was his only chance, but the path down was treacherous and filled with the restless dead. Suddenly, the shaman's spirit appeared in front of him, its eyes burning with an intense, otherworldly light. Michael stumbled back, nearly losing his footing. The spirit raised its arms, and the air around Michael grew thick and oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was trying to crush him. Gasping for breath, he realized he had to confront the shaman if he hoped to make it to the shore. Drawing on every ounce of courage, Michael stood his ground. He remembered the chants he'd mimicked earlier and began to repeat them, his voice trembling but growing steadier with each word. The shaman's spirit hesitated, its form flickering. Encouraged, Michael continued, his voice rising above the howling wind and the spirit's wails. The shaman let out an unearthly scream, and Michael felt a force slam into him, knocking him to the ground. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself to get up. He couldn't give in now. With a final desperate push, he shouted the last lines of the chant, his voice breaking the spectral tension around him. For a moment, everything went still. The spirits paused, their forms wavering. The shaman's eyes locked onto Michael's, and he felt a strange connection, as if the spirit was seeing him, truly seeing him for the first time. Then, with a burst of light, the shaman vanished, and the other spirits began to fade, their energy dissipating into the night. But the danger wasn't over, and Michael knew the spirits could return at any moment. He seized the opportunity and began his descent towards the shore. The path was steep and slippery, and he had to use every bit of his agility and knowledge to avoid falling. The first hints of dawn were beginning to colour the sky, casting a pale light over the island. But as he approached the bottom, the spirits reappeared, more aggressive than ever. They surged towards him, their forms coalescing into a wall of spectral rage. Michael pushed himself harder, his legs burning with exhaustion, his mind a blur of fear and determination. The sound of the boat's horn in the distance spurred him on. Finally he burst through the last of the undergrowth, the rocky shore now within running distance. The boat was approaching, its lights cutting through the early morning mist. Michael waved frantically, his voice hoarse as he shouted for help. The spirits were closing in, their whispers now a deafening roar in his ears. He knew he had survived a night of unimaginable horror, but the experience had left its mark. The footage he'd captured would prove the existence of the supernatural, but at a cost he had never anticipated. The island's secrets had nearly claimed his life, and if he was to successfully escape, he knew their whispers would haunt him forever. As the first light of dawn finally pierced through the dense fog, Michael reached the shore, his body bruised and battered, his spirit frayed by the night's harrowing ordeal. The sounds of the spirit's whispers were now a deafening roar behind him, urging him to run faster, to escape their wrath. He stumbled over the rocky terrain, each step fueled by sheer desperation. Just as he feared the spirits would catch him, the tourist boat's horn blared in the distance. The vessel's lights cut through the mist, a beacon of salvation. Michael waved his arms frantically, his shouts for help merging with the cries of the spirits. The crew on the boat spotted him, and the boat made a swift turn towards the shore. As Michael neared the edge of the water, the spirits surged forward, their forms more solid and menacing than ever. But as the boat approached, the spirits recoiled, unable to follow him any further. An invisible barrier seemed to hold them back, their glowing eyes burning with frustration and anger. They hovered at the shore, their wails rising to a fever pitch before they began to dissolve in the light of the rising sun. The boat crew threw a rope ladder over the side, and Michael grabbed it with shaking hands, climbing aboard with the last of his strength. He collapsed onto the deck, gasping for breath, his body trembling uncontrollably. The crew surrounded him, their faces etched with concern and confusion. You all right, buddy?" one of the crew members asked, kneeling beside him. Michael struggled to sit up, his voice hoarse and weak. "You have to believe me," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "The island, it's haunted. The spirits, they try to kill me." The crew exchanged skeptical glances. The captain, a grizzled man with a weathered face, stepped forward. "You must have had one hell of a couple of nights," he said, his tone dismissive. "And these old places can play tricks on the mind, especially when you're out here alone." "You don't understand," Michael insisted, his eyes wide with urgency. "I have proof. The spirits, they were real. I have it all on camera." Crew members helped him to a bench, offering him water and a blanket. Despite his frantic explanations, they seemed to attribute his fear to the isolation and stress of spending 2 nights on the deserted island. They murmured soothing words, assuring him he was safe now, but their expressions remained doubtful. Having taken a roll call of passenger numbers, they had eventually realized that Michael was missing. Consequently, the tourist trip had been cancelled for the day while they attempted to find him and, if necessary, bring him back to the mainland. As the boat pulled away from King Island, Michael looked back one last time. The spirits had faded into the morning light, leaving only the desolate village behind. The haunting cries and ghostly figures were gone, but their presence lingered in his mind. He knew what he had experienced was real, and the footage on his camera would prove it. And yet, as he clutched the camera to his chest, he realized that convincing others of the truth would be an entirely different battle. The boat's engines hummed steadily as they made their way back to the mainland. Michael closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. He'd narrowly escaped with his life, but the memories of King Island would haunt him forever. Back on the mainland, Michael retreated to the familiarity of his small rented apartment, still reeling from the nightmarish events on King Island. His body bore the bruises and scratches of his encounter with the spirits, but it was the scars on his mind that weighed heaviest. He knew for certain that he'd captured everything on camera. The whispers, the apparitions, the terrifying manifestations of the spirits. And as he sat down to review the footage, a gnawing fear crept over him. This footage would send him into the YouTube stratosphere if he'd captured his ordeal fully. With trembling hands, he plugged his camera in and opened the files. To his astonishment, the footage played smoothly, every moment vivid and clear, as if he were reliving the night all over again. The camera had captured the eerie glow of the spirits, their ethereal forms moving with a haunting grace. The whispers echoed through the speakers, sending a chill down his spine even in the safety of his apartment. Michael felt emotions of relief and dread. He now had undeniable proof of the paranormal activities on King Island, footage that could potentially validate his terrifying experience. But as he contemplated sharing the footage with the world, a series of strange occurrences began to unfold around him. It started with subtle noises, a faint tapping on the windows, whispers that seemed to linger in the corners of the room. Michael dismissed them at first, attributing them to nerves and exhaustion. But as the days passed, the occurrences grew more pronounced. Objects moved on their own. A chair scraped across the floor when he turned his back. A picture frame tilted askew without explanation. The air in his apartment felt heavy, as if charged with an unseen presence. Michael's sleep became fitful, plagued by dreams of shadowy figures and echoing chants. He knew then that the spirits had not stayed behind on King Island. They'd followed him, their presence lingering like a dark cloud over his life. Fear ate away at him day and night, his once passionate pursuit of urban exploration now tainted by the spectre of the supernatural. He hesitated to release the footage on YouTube, unsure of the consequences it might bring. Would sharing the proof of the spirit's existence invite more torment, more relentless haunting? In a moment of desperate clarity, Michael decided. He deleted the footage, erasing all the evidence of his ordeal on King Island. It was perhaps a futile attempt to appease the spirits, to erase any trace of their presence from his life. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The spirits had marked him, and they would not rest until they'd exacted their toll. As he sat alone in his darkened apartment, haunted by the memories of King Island and the unforeseen forces that now surrounded him, Michael realized the true twist of his story. The spirits had won. They'd not only driven him to the edge of terror, but had followed him back to ensure he would never forget the price of trespassing into their realm. And so Michael Pay, once a fearless explorer of abandoned places, slowly became a prisoner of his own fear, forever haunted by the spirits of King Island and the chilling truth that some ghosts never truly leave the places they haunt, while others never leave those that trespass their home. So, another Darius McCorkindale original there. I keep promising I'll stop doing this, and I just don't, do I? Just another one comes along. Well, these are all things that I've been working on and off for 3-4 years. Honestly, from lockdown onwards, I was just like, I get an idea, try and start writing it, and then I don't know, my motivation will go. I just couldn't finish it, or I was in a bit of a writer's block. But I've had a certain urge to finish everything, and it's kind of a rush of creativity, I guess. Anyway, I'm waffling in, but this is another one, and I always try and have a goal in mind whenever I write something. And this one was to place a supernatural story within real surroundings. So the island exists, the tribe that lived there existed, and all that kind of thing. And I just bunged a supernatural element in as well. So hope you enjoyed that one. If not, sorry. I'll try better next time. Anyway, my dear friends, that's enough for this evening. Back again very soon, probably tomorrow night even. Maybe not, I don't know. Wednesday. I don't know what night it is. All right, I'll be back again soon anyway, my dear friends. So until the next time, wishing you all very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Oh, and let me know what you thought of that story in the comment section, and I'll do my best as ever to join the conversation. Till the next time, sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.